You spent $6 on that tomato transplant in May. You amended the soil, caged it, staked it, watered it on a schedule. And by July, it looked exactly like your neighbor's. Yellow leaves crawling up from the bottom, fruit that cracked before it ripened, and a blight that spread so fast you could almost watch it move. You blamed the weather. You blamed the variety. You maybe even blamed yourself. Here is what nobody told you. There is a good chance the problem was not your tomato at all. It was what you planted 3 feet away from it. Companion planting gets talked about in cheerful graphics online. Basil goes with tomatoes, marigolds repel everything. Plant them all together and watch the magic happen. Some of that is real. But the other half, the half that actually costs gardeners harvests every single season, is what you must never put next to a tomato. Almost nobody talks about that half. 12 plants. 12 specific common plants that home gardeners put next to their tomatoes every year. For each one, you will get exactly why it causes damage and exactly what to plant in its place to get more tomatoes, not fewer. Stay with me, because number 7 is the one that surprises everyone. And number 12 is the one almost every gardener overlooks. Plant 1, fennel, the one that hates almost everything, and tomatoes most of all. Fennel is beautiful, tall, feathery, aromatic, and it will quietly undermine your tomato from below before you ever see a single symptom above the soil. Here is the mechanism, and it is simpler than most people realize. Fennel releases natural chemicals into the surrounding soil through its roots and through the decomposition of its leaf litter. Those compounds suppress the root development of neighboring plants, and tomatoes are particularly sensitive to them. This is not garden folklore. North Carolina State University Extension lists fennel as one of the few vegetables they recommend isolating from the rest of the garden entirely, not just away from tomatoes, but away from most vegetables. What you will see in practice is a tomato that starts slowly, sets fewer flowers than it should for the variety, and produces smaller fruit at the end of the season. You will treat for every pest and disease and find nothing. The fennel 3 feet away is the answer. Keep fennel in a container or in a dedicated bed at least 10 feet from your tomatoes. A pot by the kitchen door is ideal. It stays contained. You can harvest the fronds easily and your tomatoes never know it exists. What to grow instead? Carrots. Planted near tomatoes, carrots loosen the soil around the tomato's root zone as they push downward, improving drainage and aeration. They do not compete for the same nutrients, and they use the vertical space below ground while the tomato uses it above. Plant 2, brassicas cabbage, broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, the heavy feeders that starve your tomatoes quietly. These are among the most commonly planted vegetables in American home gardens and among the worst neighbors a tomato can have. Brassicas are exceptionally heavy feeders on calcium and potassium. So are tomatoes. When you plant them close together, they pull from the same reserve of available calcium in the soil at the same time. The result for your tomato is not a dramatic collapse. It is blossom end rot. That dark, sunken, leathery patch on the bottom of the fruit that shows up right when you were expecting your best harvest of the season. Blossom end rot is caused by calcium deficiency at the fruit level, and a brassica drawing calcium from the same soil is a direct contributing factor when your soil does not have an abundant reserve. Beyond nutrients, brassicas and tomatoes share several pest pressures, particularly aphids. Planting them together essentially doubles the vulnerable surface area you are offering to the same insect population. University of Maryland Extension specifically notes that heavy-feeding brassicas should be kept well separated from tomatoes and other fruiting vegetables to avoid competing for calcium and other key nutrients. Separate them by at least 1 full raised bed or a minimum of 4 feet of ground spacing from your tomato rows. What to grow instead? Lettuce. Lettuce is a shallow-rooted, low-calcium feeder that thrives in the partial shade a full tomato plant casts by midsummer. It asks almost nothing from the same soil layers your tomato depends on, and it fills the space at the base of the plant that would otherwise go to weeds. Quick thing before plant, number 3. If you are getting something real out of this and you are not subscribed to Easy Harvest Gardens yet, here is the honest reason to do it now. YouTube decides who sees this channel based on who keeps coming back. One tap on that subscribe button tells the algorithm you are a regular here, and the next time I put out something that saves your tomato harvest, you will actually see it. That is all a subscription does. One tap. And before we go further, Drop in the comments what state you are gardening in, and whether your tomatoes are in raised beds, in ground, or containers. I read every comment. Where you live in this country shapes which of these 12 you need to worry about most. The heat and humidity. In Georgia creates completely different pressure on a tomato than the short, cool summers in Minnesota or the dry soil out in Utah. Plant 3, corn. The one that draws the exact pest that destroys tomatoes. Corn and tomatoes seem like a natural pairing. Both are summer crops, both are sun lovers, both are classic American garden staples. They are also one of the most damaging combinations you can make. And the reason comes down to a single insect. The corn earworm is one of the most destructive agricultural pests in the United States. It is also called the tomato fruit worm when it attacks tomatoes, because it is the exact same moth. The female lays eggs on corn silk and tomato foliage interchangeably. The larvae bore directly into corn ears and tomato fruit. When you plant corn next to tomatoes, you are not just growing two crops. You are building one large habitat that supports a bigger population of this pest through the whole season, with the insects moving freely between both plants. The USDA has documented the corn earworm as one of the highest impact caterpillar pests on both corn and tomato crops across the southeastern and midwestern United States. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension specifically warns against planting corn in proximity to tomatoes for exactly this reason. The damage you will find is a small entry hole near the stem of your tomato fruit, a hollow interior, and a caterpillar that has already moved on by the time you discover it. Keep corn on the opposite end of your garden from tomatoes, or in a dedicated block where any pest population stays contained to that crop. What to grow instead? Borage. Borage repels tomato hornworm and cabbage worms, actively attracts pollinators to your tomato flowers, and is an annual that self-seeds freely, meaning once you plant it once, it returns on its own every year. Plant 4. At maturity, a good companion that turns on your tomatoes when it grows up. Young dill, still in its feathery early growth stage, is a genuinely beneficial tomato companion. It attracts predatory wasps that target hornworm eggs and draws aphid predators into the bed. It is a net positive at that stage. The moment dill bolts and goes to flower, that relationship reverses. Mature dill releases compounds that inhibit tomato growth, documented in companion planting research referenced in Oregon State University extension guides. The practical rule is simple. You can grow dill near tomatoes, but the moment it flowers, pull it or move it. If you want dill for seed or late-season harvest, grow it in a separate bed. What to grow instead? Chives. Cornell University's vegetable gardening resources document chives as a deterrent for aphids when interplanted with tomatoes. They stay in their footprint, come back every year, and never reach the stage where they turn competitive. Plant 5, potatoes, the one that shares your tomato's worst disease. Tomatoes and potatoes are botanical relatives, both members of the nightshade family, and they share the same most devastating disease in American home vegetable gardens: late blight. Late blight spreads by airborne spores that travel on wind and water splash, and it moves between potato foliage and tomato foliage with complete indifference to which plant it is on. When you grow potatoes and tomatoes in adjacent rows or in the same bed, a late blight outbreak in one is functionally an outbreak in both, because the spore load in the immediate air around both plants is the same. Penn State Extension specifically lists proximity of tomatoes and potatoes as a significant risk factor for accelerated late blight spread in home gardens and recommends physical separation of all nightshade family members as a core prevention practice. Beyond blight, they share aphid pressure, Colorado potato beetles, and several soil-borne wilts. Separate potatoes from tomatoes by a minimum of 10 feet, or put them in entirely different sections of your garden. What to grow instead? Garlic. Garlic planted near tomatoes repels spider mites, one of the most damaging tomato pests in hot, dry conditions across the South and Mountain West, and suppresses several soil fungi without competing for the same nutrients as your tomato. University of Georgia Extension includes garlic interplanting in their integrated pest management recommendations for tomatoes. Plant 6, peppers. Not a disaster, but not an ideal neighbor either. Millions of gardeners grow peppers and tomatoes side by side every season, without obvious disaster. If you have done it for years and your harvests have been fine, you are not wrong. But here is what the research shows, and it is worth knowing. Peppers and tomatoes compete for the same nutrients, phosphorus, calcium, and potassium, at nearly identical root depths. In a soil with average fertility, one will consistently outperform the other. In most American home garden conditions, the pepper tends to lose that competition quietly. You will notice your pepper plants stall in size and fruit production while your tomatoes look healthy. The tomato is not being aggressive, it is simply larger and pulls faster from the same reserve. Beyond competition, they share a similar disease and pest profile: bacterial spot, mosaic virus, aphids. Planting them together concentrates the target area for every one of those problems. University of Florida IFA's extension recommends separating tomatoes and peppers as a basic disease management practice, noting their overlapping pathogen susceptibility. If space requires them near each other, give them the maximum distance your bed allows. But if you have the option, separate them. What to grow instead? Asparagus. Asparagus roots produce a compound that repels root knot nematodes, microscopic soil worms that attack tomato roots and cause significant yield loss, particularly in sandy southeastern soils. In return, tomato plants repel the asparagus beetle. It is one of the few genuinely reciprocal beneficial relationships in the vegetable garden, documented in American agricultural research going back over a century. Plant 7. Sunflowers, the one that surprises everyone. Sunflowers attract pollinators, they are easy to grow, and they look stunning at the back of any garden bed. Some traditional companion planting advice says sunflowers and tomatoes are fine together. But several studies suggest tomatoes are more sensitive to sunflower root activity than most gardeners realize. Sunflowers release natural chemicals from their root systems and from decomposing plant matter that inhibit the growth of neighboring plants. A study published in the Allelopathy Journal found measurable growth suppression in tomato seedlings exposed to sunflower root activity at distances closer than 18 inches. The effect is strongest in July and August, exactly when your tomatoes are setting their heaviest fruit load and need every advantage in root function and nutrient uptake. This does not mean remove sunflowers from your garden. It means move them. Plant them at the border of your garden space, at least 4 feet from your closest tomato, where the visual benefit is fully present and the root activity stays out of your tomato's zone. What to grow instead? French marigolds. A study published in the journal Phytochemistry documented that French marigold root activity suppresses root knot nematodes in surrounding soil for up to 3 years after the marigolds are removed. They also repel whiteflies, a significant tomato pest in Florida, Texas, and California. Plant them directly at the base of your tomato plants. 1 marigold per 18 inches around the perimeter. Before plant number 8, think of one person whose tomatoes never seem to make it to a real harvest. The neighbor who keeps trying and keeps losing plants to something they cannot name. Send them this video. You do not need to write anything. Just forward the link. Plant 8, cucumbers, the one that competes where you cannot see it. Cucumbers and tomatoes are planted together constantly in American home gardens. Both warm season crops, both full sun lovers, and they seem to coexist just fine above ground. The real story happens 6 inches below the surface. Picture it this way. Your tomato has been in the ground since May, pushing roots outward and downward, building a system that will eventually support 4, 5, 6 pounds of fruit. Then you transplant a cucumber 2 feet away. Within 3 weeks, that cucumber has run aggressive shallow roots through the exact same soil layer your tomato's feeder roots depend on for water and nitrogen. Both plants are pulling from the same reserve. Neither plant tells you it is struggling. The competition just quietly reduces what each one produces. Then come the aphids, and this is where the real damage multiplies. Cucumbers and tomatoes both attract aphid colonies, and aphids carry cucumber mosaic virus, which infects both crops. A single aphid colony moving between adjacent plants becomes a transmission bridge for disease that would have stayed contained if the plants were separated. Rutgers Cooperative Extension notes that cucumbers and tomatoes should be separated in the home garden to reduce shared pest and disease pressure and minimize root competition during peak summer growth. Give cucumbers their own bed or their own end of the garden where they can spread without reaching into your tomato's root zone. What to grow instead? Basil. Beyond the culinary pairing, basil planted near tomatoes has been shown in garden trials to repel thrips and aphids. Keep it within 12 inches of the tomato stem and replace it when it bolts. since flowering basil loses most of its aromatic oil and its companion value along with it. Plant 9, mint, the one that moved in as a helper and stayed as a squatter. This one is less a companion planting mistake and more a cautionary tale about a plant that does not know when to stop. Mint arrived in your garden with the best intentions. Someone told you it repels aphids and flea beetles, and that part is true. You planted one small pot's worth in the corner of your tomato bed in May, thinking it would stay put, do its job, and behave itself. By July, it had runners moving in 3 directions. By August, it had pushed under the edge of your tomato's root zone and was coming up on the other side of the cage. The following spring, you found it in the next bed over. You pulled it. It came back. You pulled it again. It came back from a piece of root you missed that was barely the size of your thumbnail. Meanwhile, the dense, low mat it formed at soil level was holding moisture against your tomato stems. The exact condition that invites gray mold and early blight to move in from the bottom up. The helper had become the problem. Iowa State University Extension and Clemson Cooperative Extension give the same guidance. Never plant mint directly in a vegetable bed without a physical root barrier. Sink a 5-gallon container with the bottom removed into the soil, with 2 inches of rim above the surface, and plant the mint inside it. Or grow it in a pot and set it beside the bed. You get the benefit. The tomatoes keep their space. What to grow instead? Oregano. It stays exactly where you put it. Its flowers attract the parasitic wasps and hoverflies that target aphid and hornworm populations, and it never once tries to take over the address. Plant 10. Eggplant, more nightshade, more problems. Eggplant shares late blight susceptibility with tomatoes. It shares verticillium wilt, a soil-borne disease that once established is nearly impossible to eradicate and will affect every nightshade family member you plant in that bed for years afterward. It shares Colorado potato beetle pressure, aphid colonies, and spider mites. When you cluster nightshade family members together in the same bed, tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, eggplant, you are creating a continuous unbroken habitat for every pest and pathogen that targets that plant family. Outbreaks that might have stayed isolated move freely across the full planting. Oklahoma State University Extension's Integrated Pest Management Guide for Home Gardens specifically recommends a 3-year rotation that keeps all nightshade family members out of the same bed position. Eggplant is a fine crop. It just needs its own space. What to grow instead? Nasturtiums. Nasturtiums act as a trap crop. Aphid colonies colonize them preferentially and stay off your tomatoes. They attract beneficial insects, their flowers are edible, and they reseed freely across most of the U.S. Plant 11, black walnut trees. The one that is poisoning your tomatoes from 30 feet away. This one requires you to look beyond the bed at what is growing in your yard or on the property next door. Black walnut trees produce a natural compound called juglone in their roots, husks, leaves, and bark. Juglone leaches into surrounding soil through root contact and through decomposing leaf litter. Tomatoes are classified as highly sensitive to it in Purdue University Extension's Juglone Sensitivity Guide, the most widely cited reference on this subject in the United States. A mature black walnut's affected zone extends outward roughly to the edge of its canopy, and sometimes beyond. That can mean 30, 40, or 50 feet of affected soil around a large tree. Tomatoes planted within that zone will wilt, yellow, and die without responding to any treatment because the problem is chemical, not disease-related. If you have a black walnut on your property, or on a neighboring property whose canopy reaches toward your garden, map that drip line before you decide where your tomato bed goes. Raised beds with a physical barrier liner between the bed and the native soil reduce the problem significantly. What to grow instead? In areas where the effect is moderate rather than severe, squash, beans, and corn have shown the best tolerance near black walnuts. Plant 12, overgrown grass and weedy ground cover. The one almost every gardener overlooks. This is the one I told you to stay for. It does not look like a companion planting problem. It looks like a maintenance problem, but it is doing 3 specific things to your tomato at the same time, and most gardeners never connect the damage back to the cause. Grass growing densely against the base of your tomato plants, lawn creeping into a bed edge, tall weeds along the border of an in-ground row, competes for water and nitrogen at the feeder root level. In a dry July in the Midwest or a hot August in the South, The grass wins that competition before the moisture reaches your tomato. It creates a humid microclimate at soil level that promotes gray mold, early blight, and the fungal spores that splash up onto lower tomato foliage during rain and irrigation. And here is the part almost nobody explains. Tall grass adjacent to tomatoes provides overwintering habitat for thrips, spider mites, and aphid populations. They survive winter in the thatch, emerge in spring, and find your first tomato transplants of the season sitting right there. You housed the pest population all winter and delivered them to your plants in May. University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension's Vegetable Production Guide includes grass and weed management within 18 inches of tomato. Plantings as a primary early blight and pest prevention practice. Keep a clean 18-inch mulched perimeter around every tomato plant from transplant day through the end of the season. 3 to 4 inches of straw suppresses grass encroachment, retains moisture, moderates soil temperature, and prevents spore splash. If you want something living in that perimeter, low-growing thyme stays shallow-rooted and has shown mild repellent properties against several tomato pests. Here's the thing most companion planting videos will never say, and it matters more than the list itself. Removing these 12 plants reduces risk. It does not eliminate it. A black walnut on the neighboring property matters more than any companion you plant. A summer 30% drier than average overrides the best bed arrangement you can design. Late blight spores carried on wind from a farm field a mile away will find your tomatoes regardless of what is growing beside them. Every problem on this list is fixable with a shovel and a seed packet. None of them require a spray, a treatment, or a trip to the garden center. Plant the right neighbors, remove the wrong ones, and let your tomatoes do what they are built to do. Subscribe to Easy Harvest Gardens. It is free and it will always be free. Every week, the goal is the same. Practical, specific, science-backed information you can use with both hands in the dirt. One tap tells YouTube you are a regular here, and the next video finds you. One question for the comments. Which of these 12 is already in your garden right now, and what are you replacing it with? Tell me your state and tell me what your tomatoes are doing this season. And if someone in your life has been fighting tomato problems for years without finding the answer, just send them this. You already know who they are. Now go fix that garden. I will see you in the next one.